Yo, what's going on guys? HyperX here, and today I want to talk about Kena Bridge of Spirits, and more specifically talk about my hands-on impressions now that I've finished the game. It launched this week, I've been super looking forward to it. This, from the moment it was announced, was on my radar as the kind of game that I like playing, and of course knowing that Ember Lab are also massive Zelda fans, there was of course a lot of sort of Zelda inspiration in the development. There were a lot of reasons to be excited for this game. That being said, on the run up to launch, they of course had a few delays, and the fact that there were no reviews that went out before the game launched did have me worried. When I was going into it this week, and I was of course waiting for launch day to come around, I was just like, please be good. Please don't mean that there haven't been reviews because the game is busted or something and they just didn't want people to know. I'm happy to say that is not the case. I've had a fantastic time playing through it. I've really enjoyed the entire experience. I've enjoyed the world they created. So today I thought I would talk about my impressions, talk about what I liked, what I didn't like, and just give you my overall picture of the game. Again, there'll be no spoilers in this. I will of course keep this largely speaking just ambient gameplay of me exploring the world, so you won't see any bosses in this or anything like that. I might use the first boss because that was shown during the trailer just so that I can at least have something to show you guys, but there won't be any spoilers. So it's safe. If you guys do enjoy this, a like would be super appreciated. If you guys have been enjoying the content we've been uploading recently and you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We often upload multiple times a day, and there are of course lots of games we're covering, so if you don't want to miss that, make sure you keep it locked. But to begin with, let's start with the game itself. Now, it's important to note that this is not a full price game. This will actually set you back about £30 or whatever it is in dollar equivalent, effectively half price of a normal game, which actually works out quite well given that this is a shorter game. Now, if you guys have seen any of the reviews that have gone out, one of the main things that people have sort of said about Kena is that if there is anything negative to say about it, it's largely speaking that it is a short game. I personally don't feel like that's a bad thing. I feel like it was paced pretty well. In fact, off the back of recently playing through Tales of Arise, which set me back 60 hours, Eastward, which set me back 23 hours, jumping into a shorter experience was actually a breath of fresh air. But also, in a very similar manner to how I spoke about Ratchet & Clank, the one that recently came out, I feel like the game works the length that it is. Because one of the things worth noting about Kena Bridge of Spirits is that gameplay-wise, it doesn't do anything new. Now, that doesn't mean to say that is a bad thing. Not every single game that comes out needs to reinvent the wheel. Not every single game needs to be a genre-defining experience. Some games can just be good. Much like Eastward, I mentioned recently that mechanically, it's pretty simple, but what it does very well, and the same applies to Kena Bridge of Spirits. It's a really fun experience to play. The mechanics, the systems work really well, and I'll speak more about them a little bit later, and just overall, it was pretty fun. But I do feel like the length that it took me just under 10 hours to complete, and I haven't done all the collectibles, so if I do go around and get everything in the game, I could probably push closer to sort of 14, 15 hours if I wanted to. So that is a very similar length to Ratchet & Clank, and of course this is a half-price game. So honestly, I don't really think that is too much of an issue. I also feel like the way the game is structured, it follows a typical formula. I mean, every video game does, and I feel like if you were to make this game longer, you would almost run the risk of pushing into the territory of it feeling repetitive. So I feel like they've got a really nice balance whereby they are able to tell a good story, give you enough engaging gameplay that doesn't feel old, and then wraps it up in a nice tight experience. Again, that is of course my personal opinion. Some people might be like, oh, I was hoping it would be at least 20 or 30 hours. Fair enough, but that's my personal thoughts. Now, I spoke a bit about the gameplay loop. Generally speaking, of course, for those of you guys that haven't necessarily followed the game too much, you play as Kena, who is of course a spirit guide, and your typical flow for the game is that there'll be a restless spirit whom you need to basically help guide to the sort of spirit realm, help sort of let them settle, and invariably that will then send you off to a section of the map. You'll then need to go around and gather some relics that will be associated with that character, which invariably means traveling to different areas, solving some puzzles, defeating some enemies, clearing the corruption in that area, and then you take those relics to the location where you then fight a boss. Upon defeating the boss, you then free that spirit, and you then return again. And that is basically done 3 different times in 3 different sections of the map throughout the game until you get to completion. So again, formula-wise, it follows a very similar pattern. However, you do this, of course, in very different sort of visual settings, and the world is just fantastic. That is one thing that they have nailed perfectly. This is like playing a Pixar movie, and the best way to describe the game for me would be that it's like the exploration elements of Zelda paired with specifically the Korok seed collecting elements of Breath of the Wild and a Pixar movie. And that's just things that I like. I love these kinds of action-adventure games, so admittedly I might be a little bit biased, but this is literally the kind of game that I like playing. So already I was excited, And being a huge Zelda fan, there's definitely those sort of exploration elements. It's not exclusive to Zelda, plenty of other games do it, but of course, knowing the studio are Zelda fans, you can of course see where some of their inspirations came from. I mean, even down to like the mask collecting. If you guys know Ember Lab, you'll know they did a fantastic Majora's Mask cinematic, so I would be willing to bet that some of the mask inspiration probably came from that. So that is very cool because the world itself just feels alive. And it's quite interesting because in the grand scheme of things, if you were to compare it to, say, an open world, there might not be a huge amount going on in the world, in that, of course, when you're walking around, apart from fighting a few enemies, you won't necessarily encounter too many things, too many objects, too many enemies, but there's enough stuff to do. And because the game and the sort of world isn't hugely vast, it's, I kind of would describe this more as sort of wide linear, in that, largely speaking, you do have your linear path, but there are areas to explore, very similar to sort of how I spoke about Tales of Arise recently, whereby if you do go off the beaten track, you will find secrets, you will find items, you'll find rot, which of course will then link into your abilities, but it isn't so daunting that you'll then get lost for, say, 10 hours going exploring. Generally speaking, it is done in a very manageable way. In fact, the game respects your time because you can open up the map at any time and it will tell you what you have collected in that region of the map, so you can very easily use that as a checklist if you want to complete everything. But that being said, because it is a sort of slightly smaller world, even though you don't necessarily encounter enemies all the time, apart from when you go to these fixed locations where you're supposed to fight them, the world still feels alive. There's so much personality, there's so much atmosphere in it, there's so much like a vibrancy and just sort of visual spectacle that it's just one of those worlds that it makes you want to explore. The same kind of way that when I was playing Breath of the Wild, I would look at somewhere and be like, I want to go there. I kept doing the same in Kena. Obviously it's not quite as open and some areas you just can't jump to, but it does invoke those kind of feelings. Now when it comes to gameplay, generally speaking, you have a pretty sort of standard setup for combat. You've got a light attack, you've got a heavy attack, you then have some abilities that you can then start investing into as you collect more rot. The rot are of course the little sort of companion characters, and then once you meet certain thresholds, you level up, and you then unlock more abilities. These abilities can range from, bow abilities, bomb abilities, charge attacks, aerial attacks, things like that. So combat definitely has some degree of investment to it. It's not, again, hugely complicated, but it does a good job of delivering what it needs to do, and it's fun and engaging to get involved in. It's not going to have a super, super deep combat system, but for the purpose of the game and what they're trying to deliver, it works just fine. I will say one of my only gripes, because honestly, there haven't been many things that have bothered me in this game. My only one gripe, at least initially, is there's a mechanic in the game whereby you get your rot and they basically sort of jump on this little seed and they turn into this little creature, and you then guide that around as a means to clear the corruption. Now when you guide this creature, you have to do it with the right stick. Now maybe this is just a brain reprogramming thing, but initially this was kind of weird because you can still move your character with the left stick, but when you're controlling this, you lose the control of your camera because your camera is now being controlled by that creature. So you kind of have to do like a brain rewiring thing where you have to like move the character without the camera using the sort of creature, and then once it moves past you, it will then automatically shift your camera. It's a little bit odd. Understandably, there's not really many ways around it because you still need to maintain control of your character and move this thing, so it's kind of natural they would lean on the right stick. It just felt a little bit odd in gameplay, especially if you're doing this in combat, because sometimes you can be in fights where you can use this and you then kind of end up feeling like a sitting duck sometimes. So that was a little bit sort of janky to play around with, but outside of that, everything else sort of played and felt pretty smooth. My only other one gripe would be also that there are some sections or some areas of the map where it really feels like you should just be able to jump off a ledge and drop down, because it's not that high, but then you die from fall damage, or not even fall damage, you just die from falling too far. In this game, there isn't actually fall damage, it's just you can fall a certain degree, and if you fall further, you just die and then you respawn. Now the respawn system is pretty good, it will put you back to straight where you were, but when you're playing these kind of exploration games and sometimes you want to be, I guess, kind of go a direction that maybe they didn't intend you to, and you want to sort of jump somewhere, the game's just like, no, you're not allowed. Like, that's too high, you're going to die, you've got to climb down this ladder in a particular way, which, is a bit of a shame because sometimes you do like to sort of do some funny things. But again, honestly, it's like, these are really minor gripes. These are not things that have ruined the experience. It's just, there was a time I was climbing down a tall tree and I just couldn't be bothered to take the lift, and I really wanted to just like jump down, and I just couldn't do that. So I was basically forced to go back from whence I came. But outside of that, everything else I just really enjoyed. Like, I love the characters, I love the stories, I really enjoyed the gameplay, I love the world, I love the exploration aspect. I definitely plan to sort of go back and try and do some of the collectibles that I missed, because I kind of just sort of played through in a pretty organic way, whereby I was kind of going off, discovering things, finding some rock, but I didn't go and search every single corner because I was still trying to sort of progress through the story. So there is stuff that I've missed, there is stuff that I want to go back and get, and one of the other sort of collection aspects that's really nice about this is not only do you collect the rot, but you also find little hats for them, and it's just a really cool thing to see that when you're like rot are just running around the world and they're all wearing different hats and masks and stuff. It's really cool. This game has so much charm. So overall, I really liked it. Overall, I had a great time with it. It was a fantastic game that you can basically just complete over a weekend, little sort of like single or double sort of gaming session, and it was a fantastic showcase from the guys over at Ember Lab. So hopefully, for those of you guys that were wondering, you know, what the game is like, what my thoughts were, hopefully that has sort of shed some light on it and sort of given you a picture as to what the game has to offer. But again, let me know down below what you guys think. Have you played it? Are you sort of still waiting for it? What are your thoughts? But hopefully you enjoyed this video and keep it locked for plenty more. If you want to catch more from us at HyperX Gaming, don't forget you can catch the guys TwoSixNine and Paradise Central streaming over on Twitch weekdays, playing a variety of games. If you guys want to jump in, tune in, watch, and even join in, then make sure you check them out. The links to those are in the description box down below, and of course you can join the Discord to get involved in all of the discussions.